the liar knows what lie he told. You see what I'm saying? So even if I made it deceitful and I made you think that the answer is over here, but the answer is really over here, I'm still going to be looking over here. Me, the one that tricked, because I know this is the right answer. Black people have lost their identity, but our oppressors have not lost our identity. That's just why they chopped those noses off of the Pharaoh and the Sphinx in Egypt in the first place, is because without this nose, we can tell you this is whoever it is.
What most people overlook when dealing with ancient Egypt and North Africa is the population replacement that has taken place due to several invasions of Africa. North Africa was invaded by the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, and the Arabs. These people are not indigenous to North Africa. In the same way that most modern Americans aren't indigenous Americans, most modern North Africans aren't indigenous Africans. This should be obvious to any intelligent person who knows human history.
All the gods which were worshipped in Africa, which were worshipped in Sumeria, were actually African gods.
The same with Egypt?
Yes, sir. Ra, even today, amongst the Botswana people here, the name Ra means father. And the oldest warlike goddess was in Egypt, Hathor or Hathor. In South Africa, she was known as Mahato, the mother of the great footprint.
Is that the footprint you showed me once?
Yes, sir. Africa gave the world its civilization.
In 60 BCE, in Bibliotheca Historica, Book 1, by Diodorus Siculus, the Greek historian, he wrote,
"The Ethiopians conceived themselves to be of greater antiquity than any other nation, and it is probable that, born under the sun's path, its warmth may have ripened them earlier than other men. They suppose themselves also to be the inventors of divine worship, of festivals, of solemn assemblies, of sacrifices, and every other religious practice. They affirm that the Egyptians are one of their colonies. They have, like the Egyptians, 2 species of letters, hieroglyphics and the alphabet. But among the Egyptians, the first was known only to the priests, and by them transmitted from father to son, whereas both species were common among the Ethiopians."
This quote also relates to what Count Volney said in 1792 when he wrote,
"It would be easy to multiply citations upon this subject, from all which it follows that we have the strongest reasons to believe that the country neighboring to the tropic was the cradle of the sciences, and of consequence, that the first learned nation was a nation of blacks. For it is incontrovertible that by the term Ethiopians, the ancients meant to represent a people of black complexion, thick lips, and woolly hair."
Count Constantin de Volney, during a trip to Egypt from 1783 to 1785, said this, and I quote, he says, "On seeing that head," what head? The Sphinx of Giza, "typically Negro in all its features, I remembered the remarkable passage of Herodotus, 'The ancient Egyptians were true Negroes of the same type as all native-born Africans.' Just to think that this race of black men today are slaves and the object of scorn, the very race to which we owe our arts, sciences, and even the use of speech." Now, I want to ask this question. What would motivate him to say this phrase, typically Negro in all its features? Could it be perhaps this? This was an artist's conception, Vivant Denon, who accompanied Napoleon's army, 1798. This is his artist's conception of the Sphinx of Giza. Before what happened? Before the lips and the nose were shot off by Napoleon's troops. That is verifiable because Denon was an eyewitness to those lips and the lips and nose being shot off by the soldiers. Why did they do it? We cannot climb into their hearts. in the 21st century and figure this out, divine the entrails of frogs, and try to figure out why they did it. That's between them and God. But what happened, happened.
5,000 years ago, this homeland had already become the scene of a civilization in many ways unmatched anywhere else in the ancient world. This is where we have to begin, in the Egypt of the pharaohs, in the African land that was the gift of the god of the Nile. It's easy enough to believe, within these corridors built to a gigantic scale and yet wonderfully proportioned, that you've entered a world sprung complete from the lap of the gods. Egypt of the pharaohs was the greatest and the oldest and the most inventive of all the high civilizations of antiquity. And it flourished for 3,000 years. It set a pattern, an example for peoples near and far. But where were its roots, its origins, its starting point? Most of us have believed or have been taught that the glories of the pharaohs could never have been created by African people or African ideas because, it's been said, Africans could never have built a high civilization.
Egyptians are black. The real Egyptians are black because the real Egyptians, they are real Africans. So those people in Lower Egypt, you see in Cairo, Alexandria, and the Salahines area, they were mixed between the Turkish, Mamluks, French, English, Romans. So those people who come to attack Egypt in that time, they couldn't come to Upper Egypt, to the south, which we still had the same color.
It followed that the royal children were often black as well, as was King Senusret, seen here wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt. Or this pharaoh, of unknown name, but obviously of high prestige in his time, and just as clearly African. Elephantine Island in the Nile marked the border between Egypt and Nubia, and was a place of great sanctity in ancient times. Among the travelers who came here were the earliest European historians, the Greeks, men like Herodotus, brought up as he was in the classical tradition which regarded the various races of the known world as different but equal. The Greeks knew Egypt well and firmly believed that the original Egyptians were black people who had come from the south to settle the land of the Nile. But Herodotus himself got no further than this. He was prevented by the first cataract from traveling further south. And so he never saw the huge temple which Ramesses II chose to build here at Abu Simbel, further south into inner Africa, than any other great monument built by the pharaohs to celebrate their power.
Unfortunately, the African identity of ancient Egypt was gradually erased in art, in textbooks, and in mainstream history. In other words, it was whitewashed, and Egypt was then framed as not even being African and recast as somehow Mediterranean or even Middle Eastern. This distortion only worked to support colonial agendas. The idea was that if Africans never created any great civilizations, then it was okay to enslave them. In fact, the enslavers would be doing them a favor. They called this the white man's burden, and they had to tell themselves that the ancient Egyptians were dark-skinned Caucasian, and if any black people were in Egypt, they were only there as slaves.
The liar knows what lie he told. You see what I'm saying? So even if I made it deceitful and I made you think that the answer is over here, but the answer is really over here, I'm still going to be looking over here. Me, the one that tricked, because I know this is the right answer. Black people have lost their identity, but our oppressors have not lost our identity.